Hello, my lovely renovators. How are you doing this week? I hope that you are all doing amazing and your renovation planning is coming along really well. So glad to have you here. Thanks for listening and for coming back each week. I would absolutely love it if you're finding the content of this podcast useful. If you know someone who's renovating and they could do with some help, please give us a little share. Just hit that share button and you can send them our way, and they can also benefit from all the great free renovation help that we offer. All right, so today on the podcast, in this episode, I want to talk to you about what's behind the walls. So this is always a scary one when you're renovating. So we're talking about what's behind the walls and renovation surprises and how to prepare for them. So of course, if you're starting a renovation, you don't know what's behind the walls until your demolition actually begins and things start being torn down and you can finally see what you're dealing with. So this is always a little scary, especially when it comes to your budget, because it kind of stops you from being able to prepare really well for any surprises that might come up, because you don't actually know what might come up. So it's a kind of catch-22 situation. But in this episode, I want to talk you through things you can actually do, things you can look out for, how you can just prepare yourself better, because it's not that surprises won't come up, especially in older properties, like many of the ones I work with here in the UK and here in London. Things always come up. They're old properties that have been around for over 100 years, that have been renovated perhaps in the 60s and the 70s, in the 80s, when building regs were different and safety regs were different. So things do come up. And I think the thing is, it's not to pretend that they're not going to be happening or that they won't come up, but it's kind of not to be blindsided by them. It's to be ready, or as ready as you can be without actually being able to see behind the walls. And so that's what I want to talk to you about in this episode today. So let's get into the episode, everybody. Okay, number one, let's start here. Let's start with the most common kind of mid-build surprises that come up. So you've prepped everything, you're starting your reno, the builders are in there, they're starting to demo, and usually this is when a lot of the unexpected surprises come up. So let's start there. Let's start with a little bit of a reality check of quite a few things that I've seen come up again and again. And hopefully this will help you. So if you now know what might come up, perhaps you can better prepare yourself for them if they do come up for you. Okay, so top, I think something that usually comes up is people wanting to remove a wall and then finding out it's load bearing. So this isn't the end of the world actually, because load bearing walls can have openings put into them as long as it's dealt with properly. You need to get a structural engineer, you need to get the correct size of steel beam that can support the weight that wall is then supporting. And your columns that support that steel beam need to be correct as well and calculated correctly by your structural engineer. So that sounds a bit expensive, and it is. So if you want to put an opening into a brick wall that's a supporting wall, or any wall that's a supporting wall, then you will have to follow that process, and that costs money. The steel beams will cost money, your structural engineer will have to be paid. So that's one that comes up a lot. You can get around it, but you can also budget for it if you know. So you can work around that one. It's not impossible. Other things that come up, I find lots of times it's old wiring. So the electrics aren't up to code because perhaps they were kind of done by the previous owners. Perhaps there was a bit of repair here or there, bit of a bodge job. Sometimes people tend to try and fix a few things themselves. Then that causes issues. That then doesn't pass code when you need to have everything signed off for your renovation, when you start uncovering that work. And then the same applies to plumbing. You know, sometimes there's leaks inside the wall that you can't see. So when the demo phase starts, start opening up walls, you'll find leaks, you'll find damp pipes, you'll find drips. And then the next one is joists, so rotten floorboards, quite a common one here in the UK, and especially where there's water, kitchens, bathrooms, or water's perhaps been slow leaking onto the wood, onto the joists, and that's been soaking it up, weakening it, and then those need to be replaced. So these are all things that can come up when you start opening things up, opening up the walls, opening up the floors. Another common one I see are unsupported chimney breasts. This is actually quite a big one and quite dangerous. I think back in the day, people just used to take out the chimney breast because they wanted the extra space in the room. So remove the fireplace, knock out the chimney breast, but then not think about what that might have been supporting above it. Perhaps there's another chimney above it that is still there, and then that chimney is putting really huge pressure onto the floor, which is usually only made of wood or joists or floorboards. So that really needs to be addressed and dealt with. So that is quite a common one that you could come across when you start opening up the floor and you see that there's a chimney breast that's not supported. So that then, again, similar to a structural wall, so that needs to be calculated by a structural engineer. They will come up with a solution of how to support that chimney breast, whether it be a wooden beam or a steel beam or something else. They will then look at the situation individually and come up with a solution of how to support that. So again, that would be additional costs of steels, wooden beams, structural engineer costs. Okay, and then the last one I have here is asbestos. Now, I have seen this come up for a couple of people, and this is a little stressful. I mean, it's a toxic material that was used in buildings many years ago when it was allowed, and now obviously it's not allowed anymore because it's really dangerous to use or to have in your building. But as long as it's not disturbed, it's generally okay. But when you come across it in your build, you will have to have it removed, and you will have to have it removed by specialists. So there are specialist companies that will come out. So as soon as asbestos is found in any property, works need to stop immediately, and a specialist company needs to come in all their protective gear and remove all of the asbestos really safely and under strict conditions, so that it's then safe for everyone else to come back on site and to carry works out. So of course that's going to add some extra money onto your project, onto your budget, because that specialist removal is going to cost money. And of course it also depends on how much asbestos. If there's quite a lot, it's going to cost you more. So those are the most common ones that come up that I found. But let's move on now to number 2. So let's move on to number 2 now. So what is the real cost of these surprises? And I don't only mean money. Of course, it will affect your budget, but also it's going to affect your timeline. And then of course, add some extra fees, labor, materials as well. So let me just give you a few quick examples here of how this could affect your project and your budget. So let's look at a quick example of rewiring. So let's say you found some old wiring that needs to be completely taken out because it's not to code. It won't work with any new systems that you're going to be connecting onto it. So I have actually had this before in a project, and we had to rewire the entire property. So this was a first floor apartment, and to rewire the first floor apartment completely cost £5,000. So you can see here how just something that you may have thought was fine could suddenly add £5,000 onto your project, which is quite a big chunk when it comes to it and you look at your contingency. But you know, that's a safety thing. That is something that needs to be done. So you have to think about it, and you have to consider that is something that might have to be done, especially if you're in an older property. But like I said, it's not only the money, it's the time as well, because, and I always say this, never is time is money more true than it is on a building site. So every delay, you're paying your extra costs, you're paying for whatever your additional accommodation might be, your additional bills, the contractors to not be able to move on as quickly as they had before. So every day or every week that your project drags out is going to cost you as well. And then of course, that's not only financial, that's emotional too, because you're out of your home is a mess, you might be living inside your home while the works are going on, you just want it to be over with, you might be living somewhere else, then that adds to the additional stress of what you might be paying there, if you might be renting someone else and paying rent there as well. So the additional stress, I think, counts for a lot as well. It's not only the money, it's that emotional stress on you and your family unit also. So, you know, these things can knock your confidence when you're renovating, and also the momentum of your whole project. So moving on to number 3, you know, I don't want to get you in a stressful situation, get you all stressed out about your project, you can plan for it to a certain extent. You can plan for the unknown and just, without panic. So let's look at a few ways you can do this here so that you don't find yourself in a really stressful situation when these things might come up. Okay, so here's what I recommend. Build in a contingency, always. So standard, I would say, if you're doing a big renovation project, so where structural things are involved, where you're building an extension, adding a loft conversion, add at least 15 to 20% contingency, because that should cover you if anything like those electric problems come up, asbestos, plumbing issues. Then you can lean into your contingency. And if you know it's there for these problems, if they arise, that immediately reduces that stress. So build your budget around that. Try and work within those percentages so that you can have that 15 to 20% contingency kept aside for exactly these kinds of things. That really does add peace of mind. If you're doing a smaller project, like more cosmetic jobs, not a complete remodel, if you're just doing a bit of decoration or you're doing a kitchen or bathroom, then probably 10% contingency is enough. So larger projects, 15 to 20%, and then smaller projects, I would say about 10%. That's what I would recommend. And then besides the contingency, there are other things you can do as well. You can speak to your contractor before works begin. You can ask your contractor to go around. You can ask them to open up small areas of the walls where you might suspect any problems or where you need work to be done. They can open up kind of an inspection part of the wall so that you can have a look inside. You can try and see what is happening, if there's any issues, or if something's supported or not. And then, of course, things like structural walls, you can find out at the start of your project. By speaking to an architect, by speaking to a structural engineer, they can generally, before you start work, look at a wall and tell you if it's structural or not. And so if you aren't working with those professionals on your project, perhaps it's worth getting someone in, paying them for a consultation, a walk around, so that you then know what you're dealing with. Because that knowing is a lot less stressful than starting your project, getting halfway through, and then finding out about that issue. So that's another way you can kind of just preempt it, mitigate for it before you start build works. And then also, before you start works, just do your due diligence. The general things that everyone says to do, like your survey, get a survey done. See if you can get the contractors, perhaps one of the contractors who are about to quote for you. Ask them if they walk around with you and explain where they might see issues, because a good contractor will be able to help you. They'll be able to tell you where you could potentially come up against these things. And then when you're in the middle of your build and these do come up or perhaps come up, that's the time just to stay calm and think about an action plan of how you're going to deal with it, who you're going to get involved, get some quotes of how much it will cost to fix the problem, to progress with your build. And of course, the calmness will come if you know that some of these things might come up, which again is exactly why I'm doing this episode. So if you know that these things might happen, it's good to know about them. It's good to know that you can prepare for them to a certain extent and kind of be ready for them if they arise. So just remember, the goal isn't to kind of eliminate these surprises. It's just to know that they might happen, and if they happen, you have an action plan in mind. Okay, so moving on to number 4. Let's end the episode with some red flags and some things you can look out for before you start. So here's a super quick list of, if you spot these things in your home whilst you're planning for your renovation. And so here's a quick list of what you should look out for if you're planning your renovation. Just before you start your build, make sure to have these checked out exactly like I've just been speaking about. Here are some things that might give you a hint that some of these issues might come up. Number 1, if your floors are uneven and a bit bouncy, sometimes that's an indication that the joists aren't solid. Perhaps there's been a leak, perhaps some joists need replacing, or perhaps even floorboards. If there's any cracks in your walls, especially around windows and door frames, that's usually a sign that something could be up as well. So there might be some additional repair to do there, some additional structure to be added or support beams. So that could be an indication as well, especially if they're kind of larger cracks rather than hairline cracks. And then smells, damp smells, that's usually a huge giveaway that there might be a leak inside the walls that you can't see. It might be behind the bath, underneath the shower. And this is also a tip for around windows and doors. If you can smell any damp, perhaps there's water coming in, perhaps the framing needs to be replaced or the whole door. So that's an indication as well. So these are all things you can list. You can make a list of, kind of assess the situation or the structure of your house as it is before you start works. And these are all things you can discuss with your contractors and your architects when you come to it. Also, some obvious giveaways are if the electrics aren't working properly or if there's some flickering, that might be an indication that the wiring is old and that might need replacing. And then also rooms that feel a bit drafty or a bit cold, you might instantly know that there's drafts around the windows, air's getting in, perhaps the insulation needs to be upgraded. So all of those things are some hints, some red flags that you can look out for. And then just knowing those things and that you need to discuss them with your builder and ask them to just give you an indication of how much they would cost to fix if you did come to it, if it did turn out that it was an issue. That also helps you to prepare your budget and prepare for your project a lot better. So if you see these, don't panic, calmly note them down and flag them with your builder or your architect before works begin. And that also just means you're going to be so much better prepared for your project. So to end off this episode, everybody, yes, renovating can be full of surprises. But the more we expect the unexpected, the more we can prepare ourselves for it, right? So prepare wisely, keep perspective, and remember that, some of that money you're going to be spending behind the walls sometimes is some of the best money you spend, because it's going to make your home safe, it's going to make your home warm, it's going to make your home structurally secure. So I think if you just feel calm about it, ready for if they do occur, and just think about it in a way that you're making your home a really, really healthy, good, safe place to live in. I know sometimes it can be hard to take when you have a massive surprise coming up that really hits your budget and it forces you to compromise elsewhere on something that you really might have wanted. But, just know that when you're renovating, you want to do it properly. You want to create a safe, warm, comfortable home. And also doing those things properly, it's actually a good investment, because down the line, that's done. You won't have to deal with it again if you do it properly this time round. And it's going to prevent any further works in the future if you may have left it as it was and you have issues with that. So I hope you found that episode useful. I hope it's made you feel a little bit more prepared for if any of these surprises come up. And that brings us to the end, everybody. And I hope to see you next week. Thank you for listening. It's bye for now. For more information on my 5-pillar process for successful renovation, you can go directly to southplacestudio.com/pillars, where you'll find an introduction to the process which covers each of the pillars and what they cover. We also have a number of other free renovation resources. Go now to southplacestudio.com/freebies. I have created some amazing freebies for you there. There is one on the process, like we just said. There is one on planning permission. There is one on kitchen design. There is another one on lighting planning. Go and check those out. There's so much free information there to help you with your renovation.